Now, to add such a HTML file, we need a feature called templates. Templates allow us to predefine HTML files, which we can then enrich with dynamic data with help of our Python code, our Django code, before we send them back to a browser. That can be helpful for loading data from a database, for example. And it is something we'll need later. For the moment, we'll define a static template which does not have any dynamic data, but which will still already be a HTML file which we want to send back to the client, to the browser. And for this here, in my app folder, I'll add a templates folder, and it should be named templates. Now it should be named templates because if we have a look at settings PY, we see that in there we find a templates setting. And indeed, this templates feature is a key feature built into Django, and Django has certain places where it will look for template files. And by default, it looks in the app directories, so in the folders for your different apps that make up your project, and in those directories, it will look for a templates folder. So that's why you should add such a templates folder there. You could also add extra directories, and in the full course we do that for some base templates which we can use across multiple apps, but for this example here, for this course, we don't need that. So therefore we have this templates folder, and in there you should create another subfolder where you repeat your app name. So that in the meetups folder, I have a templates folder with a meetups folder inside of it. This might sound strange, but what Django will do behind the scenes is that it will take all the templates from all your apps and merge them into one giant templates folder, so to say. And if you don't add your app name as a subfolder in the templates folder, you therefore can have clashes if you have multiple apps where you then have templates with similar names. It's not something we have here, but it is something which you could have in bigger apps. Again, I talk in greater detail about all those things in the full course, and therefore it is a good practice to have this subfolder in your app-specific templates folder where you repeat your app name. And in that subfolder, you can now define your template files, which are in the end just simple HTML files in which you will be able to use special features. But I'll come back to that later. For the moment, I will add one HTML file in here, and that's the index HTML file, which I want to return as a HTML file for my index view here. Now, in that index HTML file, you can create and write standard HTML code. And here in Visual Studio Code, we can quickly create a base skeleton by typing an exclamation mark to get this auto suggestion here, and then hitting tab. And this will give us such a base skeleton, and we can now enter a document title here, like all meetups, since that is what this project will be about. And then in there, for example, add a h1 tag where I say all meetups, and below that a paragraph where I say hello world. And that's of course not the final output. We'll have more realistic HTML code later, but it is a start. Now with that, if we save that file, we can go back to views py, and here I now want to return my template as a response. Now this standard HTTP response, which we return here, doesn't want a template, at least not like this, but we got this render shortcut, which is already imported from Django here, which will help us with returning a rendered template. And therefore, we now return the result of calling render here instead of returning the HTTP response. And hence we can remove this import. And what render will do is it will create a HTTP response behind the scenes, but a response configured to return a rendered, which means a prepared, template. Because I mentioned that templates can also have dynamic data injected, something we'll do later, and render does do that. It prepares those templates, enriches them with possibly available dynamic data and generates the final static HTML content, which then can be returned to the browser. And to work correctly, render needs at least two arguments. The first argument is the request, which we're getting as a parameter here already. So I'll just forward it to render. The second argument then is the name of our template or the path to our template, but very important, the path seen relative from the templates folder. So it's not templates/meetups/index.html or anything like that. Instead, it's just meetups/index.html. Because in the templates folder, we have the meetups folder, and that folder contains index.html as a subfolder. That might look strange in my editor, by the way. This, however, meetups is a subfolder of templates, which then in the end carries the index.html file. That's just how these two subfolders are displayed here. So now with that, I'm rendering this file as a template, and then I'm returning a response with that rendered content back to the browser. And hence, if we save this, and I make sure that my development server is up and running, if we reload this page for /meetups, we now see this HTML content. And that's how we can use and return templates. Now, of course, ultimately, the goal is not to return ugly HTML files like this, though. Instead, we typically also want to add some CSS and maybe also some JavaScript code to make it look a bit prettier. And that's what we'll do next.